Welcome, everybody, back to the Leadership Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. We've been on a long break. We still haven't found another Republican to join us, which makes the conversations a little bit lopsided, but we continue to look for somebody who might be interested to represent that side. In the meantime, one of the things that brought us all together is the issue that is going on in Minnesota right now, in Minneapolis. We were all talking about this, and we felt we got to come together. We got to talk about this. So, for those of you who maybe haven't been keeping up with the news cycle, there's violence in Minneapolis between ICE and the people there. I think that's the long and the short of it. We'll get into more details here. With me today, I've got Will Atkins and Thea Ali, both Democrats. I'm the Libertarian here. And as I said, we are missing a Republican. Would love to have somebody come join us and present that side of the issues. So without further ado, I think we jump into it. And I think probably we need to start with whatever the facts are. And the reason I say whatever the facts are is because what I've noticed over the past couple of weeks, and probably you guys have noticed it too, is one, it seems like I am seeing different snippets of news than other people are in my social media feeds. And two, even when we see the same thing, a lot of times we disagree on what we're actually seeing. So I think we probably have to start with establishing what is no kidding ground truth, and then what is maybe up to interpretation from the viewer slash reader listener.
And are we starting then with why ICE is even there?
I thought about, so are you talking about like the Children's Leering Center and that kind of stuff? Or are we going even further back than that?
Is that how far back we're going, or are we going
I think let's, I always say I think we build it from giving the benefit of the doubt that ICE has a right to enforce immigration laws and
Yes.
to help to facilitate that. And so, with the most generous interpretation is ICE is in Minneapolis for enforcing immigration rules and laws and there to, detain people and basically facilitate the deportation process for undocumented individuals. Which I don't think the issue is that they don't have a right to be there, or at least not from my perspective. And so, I think if we're just starting with why are they there? They're there to enforce immigration. Okay. Why are they there in the large numbers that they are? I think goes to what you guys were starting to allude to, is that we know there's a political motivation in having these large numbers of ICE agents and also Border Patrol. They're augmenting them in these blue.
Also, not to interrupt, not only are there large numbers of them, but also why are they geared up like tactical SWAT teams while they're there?
Yeah, I think that, so let's start, in the current administration, there is definitely like a militarization of this particular government agency, right? And I don't know, it's interesting because we could have had another episode of like my issues with us militarizing our police force, like our local police forces across the country. I've felt that was problematic in the past. And so now to have the federal government do it, I actually think it speaks to a few different issues beyond just like over policing, but like, we had our Second Amendment, episode months ago. And I know, Dion, you brought up the whole idea of like what it means to be a well-organized militia. Why should people the whole idea that part of the reason that we have a right to bear arms is if the federal government were to, tread on us and all of that. And it's interesting that that's what we're kind of seeing right now. And I'm always like, oh wow, the "Don't Tread on Me" people are supporting the government treading. Like it's so weird. It's
And now
like
it's
we're in
the
the upside down.
Democrats that are like, "Don't tread on me," and we're
Yeah,
gonna go
we're
take
in the
Biden.
upside down.
Yep.
But I think yeah, Dion, I think it's the issue isn't that they're there, and I think it's important to say that because I don't want to frame it wrong. The issue is that they're there in the numbers that they are. I think right now there are 4 times as many ICE folks on the ground as there are local police in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the surrounding areas. So it's definitely like a blitz operation where they
Yeah,
have
what I read, I think it was this morning, I read that like 13% of all ICE assets are deployed to Minneapolis right now, which
yes,
when you look at, the broad coverage of the United States, especially like the southern border, which is where we tend to have, in and around the southern border is where we
yeah.
tend to historically have the most issues with illegal entry. It just doesn't make sense that that number of assets would be deployed to Minnesota.
And that's one of my major things is like they're not there for immigration enforcement. They're there as revenge. They're there as Governor Walls made fun of Trump, and now Trump's going to get some revenge. Or
Well,
the people of Minneapolis are standing up for themselves, so they're
I don't
like,
think the
okay, then we're
Republicans would say that.
that's why I was about to push back. I don't think it's fair to say they're not there for immigration enforcement because the reality is we don't have enough resources. ICE doesn't have enough resources to enforce, for to be everywhere all at once, right? That
so
it's
why
not
are they
that
in
large.
Minneapolis?
But they can be, so the idea, that's why, because I've, my conversations with more conservative people, one of the things that I hear them really push back on is the idea that it matters that we pick Minneapolis versus Texas, Florida, or California, which are the 3 states that have the largest number of undocumented individuals, right? And I don't want to go down I don't necessarily think it's fruitful to say they shouldn't be in Minneapolis because wherever there are people that are violating the immigration laws, in theory, I should be able to be there. But I agree with you in the idea of, but why would you dedicate 13% of your force, of your resources to a place that have where the problem is in a much smaller, it's not as big as it is in other places, right? And I'll use Texas and Florida as examples because we know that it seems like they're sending ICE in this tactical gear in this aggressive manner in blue states, right? So even though Texas has the number 2 number of undocumented people and Florida is right there at number 3, you haven't seen this level of enforcement happening, even though, especially when you're talking about Texas, the southern border is right there. You know what I mean? Like the southern border is right there, and so yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, Florida, Texas, and California. Like we've skipped 10 other states with higher
Yeah,
immigration issues to
yeah,
go after Minneapolis and Portland
yeah,
because they're blue bastions. Like
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's the part that I'm like, you can't claim that this is over immigration enforcement when you're going after Minneapolis and Portland. You're going after blue states, blue cities who have the audacity to stand up to you.
So let me
Yeah.
let me try to steel man the Republican side of this, which, as best as I understand
Please
it,
do. Please do.
so I think our Republican friends would probably say the reason why they are concentrating on those blue states is because those blue states are the ones that deliberately defied federal law by establishing sanctuary cities and flat out saying that they defy federalism by denying the ICE agents and the executive their duty to enforce immigration law. I think
And
that's what I
and
understand from Republicans.
and I think I've heard that argument, and I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how our laws are enforced in this country, because it's never been the role of state and local governments to enforce federal laws, right? And that is what the whole sanctuary city part was
But
about. It was that.
but they can't impede. They can't actively
Yeah,
impede either.
let me
Okay.
finish. There's a difference though. Where a lot of the sanctuary, because I've read them when I was in law school. I got involved in some of this. I worked some of these issues, but the sanctuary cities were never saying we were going to impede ICE or the federal government's ability to enforce immigration laws. What the whole point of it is that they were not going to put forth local resources to help, right?
They
So
were
where
going to
you have these MOAs with different principalities, different localities, where they'll say, okay, yeah, our sheriff's department will assist ICE in detaining people. Or if we pick up somebody and they find themselves in the court system in name your town, we'll call ICE and let them know, hey, we've identified that this person is undocumented. And though they had these cooperation agreements, a lot of places have cooperation agreements with the federal government. What sanctuary cities were saying is we're not going to engage in those agreements, right? We're not going to put our resources towards helping to enforce these laws. And there were reasons for it, right? I'll start with one. This is kind of how I started touching this in the area of domestic violence, right? So you have these situations where somebody is violent and now you have a victim calling 911, which invites, of course, the criminal justice system to get involved. What was happening is if somebody is an undocumented person and they are being abused, they're not going to call 911 and have the police come out of fear that that's going to get them deported, right? Now, yet you may have children in the home, you may have all these other things going on, and now you've created a disincentive for there to be any type of local intervention in those scenarios. So part of the reason why certain locations said is like, well, we want them to call 911. We want them to, to feel that the police can come and it's not automatically an ICE situation. So there's reason, those are things. Same thing with medical, like you want people to go to the hospital and report a gunshot wound and these types of things. And so that was what was motivating some of this. But and when I was reading through it, it was never, if ICE comes to town, we're going to impede them. We're going to stop them. We're going to fight them. It was, we're not going to cooperate. And if you believe in federalism, you should believe that a state has a right to choose how to use its local resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
I guess you could also make the argument that, like, if you're a betting man and you want to maximize your chances of getting however many deportations as you've been charged with getting per month, you're probably going to go to those places where you're likely to find them, which is probably those sanctuary cities. So even if it's not to get revenge on active defiance.
No, I would argue the opposite, because you would go to the place where the local law enforcement is going to help you, because then you double your numbers just automatically. So if you're in Texas and they have these cooperation agreements, you would go to the place where your resources are going to be doubled and tripled because the local folks are there to help, right?
But we've had a couple of years now of these sanctuary cities existing. So I don't know. Like, again, this is not my position. I'm trying to find the reasonable, rational Republican position, and like these people have had time to like migrate to sanctuary. And in fact, remember when Texas and Florida were like sending busloads of people to sanctuary states?
But the point is,
in Minneapolis, though, the majority of them are there legally, right? The massive Somali population there are there legally, and Trump is kind of retroactively being like, yeah, but I don't like the process by which we let them into the country legally, and they're eating your cats and dogs, and therefore we're going to go send 4,000 ICE agents to Minneapolis.
I think that's a good point, that when we talk about the Stephen Miller view on immigration, that there is a retroactive, I don't agree with how, what immigration laws were, have been over time, and these different populations that have been permitted to enter the US legally as of the time that they came. Therefore, I'm going to treat all immigrants as if they shouldn't be here. And we've seen this from Trump recently. If an immigrant is here and then they do something, even if they're here based on, they're documented and they have legal status, if they're here and they get involved with something bad, then it's like, see, this is why we shouldn't have these people here, right? And I think that's where you're talking about that fraud scandal in Minneapolis or in Minnesota.
And let's be clear, like the fraud scandal in Minneapolis, like wherever the fraud is occurring, those people should be tried and brought to justice and go to jail if that's the punishment. Like no one is trying to hide the fraud, right? But now do Florida, where there's just as much fraud going on with education vouchers that have gone missing, or like, I got it. There's fraud. There's fraud.
And those PP, what was it? The small business loans that happen around COVID, now do those, right? Like there's so many other places.
Some of which went to members of Congress, right?
Wait, are you guys saying that we should clean the swamp? That we should drain the swamp?
Right? Just treat everybody equally.
The thing that upsets me about this whole, number one, the main person I believe that was orchestrating this fraud scandal is not an immigrant. So let's start with that. But a lot of people who were supporting it were, but from as I understand it, like one of the main women was just a regular old white lady. So like not an immigrant.
We're calling them awfuls these days.
No, just like, yeah.
Which brings up the fact that native-born Americans commit crimes at higher rates than immigrants. But go ahead.
And it's the same. I think so. Kind of coming in back to the whole, okay. So even if you have, if the federal government decides for some reason Minnesota is a state where we, because you could make an argument why you would go to Minnesota, right? You would say it's smaller, because California. I think part of the reason this didn't happen in LA was because our law enforcement, we had so many more cops, right? So when ICE was here, I think I told you, I remember walking to court one day and you had LAPD like blockading between ICE and pedestrians and like the protesters. So when you have a huge local police force that is trained in all of the like de-escalation and riot response and all that, then it kind of created a buffer between ICE and the people, right? And I mean, it wasn't a perfect buffer, but I think that's why you couldn't. I mean, and if you sent 3,000 ICE agents into LA County, that would be a drop in the bucket based on the amount of law enforcement we have here. Whereas there's not enough local law enforcement to create that buffer in Minneapolis, right? The cops are outnumbered, and so now what you have. Go on.
Until the National Guard gets activated by the governor, in which case then
you literally have a war zone.
Yeah,
because I think the reason I continue to argue about the local police is, and we've talked about this before, military and ICE are not trained in de-escalation, and they're not meant to be the front line, protect and serve law enforcement agency. And so I think when you start bringing the Guard, even if they're coming in on behalf of the governor, you have people who are trained to do different things. And that's not necessarily.
Even more problematic with the Guard is that they can be federalized under Title 10, and that, forgive the pun, trumps the governor's Title 32 orders.
Yeah.
And so I really hope that doesn't happen, right? Because can you imagine being National Guard? You show up for duty under Title 32 under Governor Walz, and then you get the phone call of, you need to go to the other side of the street and put your gun the other way because now you're working for us. Like, holy crap.
And I think that's why you haven't seen them call up the Guard. I think that's why, because I think, the same way we got to that conclusion in 2 seconds, I think that Governor Walz probably has figured that out as well.
But I heard he's calling them up. I heard he's mobilizing them now.
Moving that direction.
I think, yeah, it's gotten bad. I think, but I do think that's why you're seeing so many like, right, like ordinary citizens, getting involved. And so I think like let's shift. So we've established that ICE is in Minnesota. They're there in large numbers. There is a debate as to whether they should or shouldn't be in that specific location, but we know they're there. And what we're seeing is that they are enforcing. There's a series of videos that are coming out on social media and in traditional media outlets of ICE acting in very aggressive, appearing to violate use of force rules, the government's use of force rules, in how they're interacting with the public. And you're getting, a number of stories about, U.S. citizens being picked up. One of the big things is it's very clear that there seems to be, that ICE's enforcement is racially based, right? There's racial profiling going on. If you look like you could be Hispanic or Black or, Asian, you're the target regardless of what you're doing, where you are, what activity you're engaging in. So now there's this, if you look a certain way, you now have to have your quote unquote papers on you. And the last I checked, like I don't walk around with my passport all the time, so that is becoming an issue where people are feeling harassed or feeling singled out, where there's no rhyme or reason other than what they look like. And so that has been uncomfortable. And I think the big issue, as far as those facts go, there was an incident with, and what's her Good? What was her full
Renee
name?
Good.
The woman who was killed, Renee Good, where she was killed by an ICE agent. And there's several videos, and this kind of comes to what you were starting off to say, Dion, is that we're all looking at the same video. So there are several videos of the incident. And, what you do see is it appears, and you please chime in, it appears that she was, from what I understand, she had dropped her child off at school. She had her wife in the car with her and her dog. And she came across an ICE, somebody, and it seemed like ICE was trying to detain somebody. She stopped her vehicle and was blocking traffic. And so her vehicle was like impeding the road. And she was told to move her vehicle, right? But then the videos, depending on which videos you get, it seems like there was definitely a lot of yelling. It was a chaotic scene. You had people with whistles. Her wife had gotten out of the vehicle, was filming, and was talking to the ICE agents. And you basically hear her kind of being flippant, telling an ICE agent, "Well, I'm not mad at you, bro. Like it's all good," or something like that. But you do hear competing commands. You have some ICE agents screaming to move the vehicle, but then you hear a command to get out of the car. And it appears as she goes to turn the vehicle, we can't know for sure what her motivation was, but the video appears that she was turning the vehicle perhaps to move the car. And at that time, there was an ICE agent that was somewhat in the line of the vehicle. I think, again, that we can talk about this, but in any event, he ends up shooting her, first through the windshield and through the window of her driver's side window.
His own cell phone in his hand, which maybe he didn't have a body cam. I don't know why he's got a hand on a cell phone. Through the windshield is showing her twisting the wheel as hard as she can to turn to the right to avoid him, while he's holding the cell phone and reaching for his weapon to then shoot her at the same time.
I think one thing to understand about his particular video, which I don't think is the best video to go by, because at some point he drops the phone and it looks as if he, like, the way the video looks from his cell phone footage, it almost looks like he fell or he was taken out, which is not what happened. He drops the phone when he finally goes to shoot the weapon. I don't know about you guys, but as somebody who knows how to shoot a gun, I have never, ever in any training I've ever received where someone's like, yeah, hold your gun in one hand and your phone in the other. Like that part
I'll come back at that. And so let me preface by saying, I think that he was he was acting poorly and not as he should be properly trained by trying to hold on to a cell phone and draw a firearm at the same time. So I'm going to state that up front. I think he was wrong. However, I will also point out that one of the major reasons why a lot of states have no hands laws when you're driving, like you're not allowed to hold your cell phone in your hand, is because human reaction is like if you're holding on to something and like something happens, your immediate response is not to drop it. Your immediate response is to hold on to it tighter. So again, he's the trained individual. He should not have done that. At the same time, there is a psychological reason for him to holding on to that, at least initially. I will also say that, again, what I think becomes difficult is that we have the ability to Monday morning quarterback this incident. We see the replays, and especially we see a lot of slowed down footage. And when you actually look at the footage in real time, this whole thing is over in a matter of, it's like less than 2 seconds, which is a very short amount of time to make a lot of decisions. And again, I think the ICE officer was acting, he was already agitated. He was escalatory.
He had just gotten called fat by the wife.
Right, yeah, he should be able to brush that off. But like, so I did see an interesting analysis where they were talking about what this guy is seeing, because he was actually, if you notice in his video, he's following around Renee Good's wife and talking to her, and she kind of walks around the vehicle. So he walks around with her. And so the video analysis that I saw where this guy was talking, he said this guy's focus is on her and not necessarily what Renee behind the wheel is doing, because this woman is out of the car and she's filming him and she's doing stuff with her hands, right? So he's focused on, does she have a weapon? Does she have ill intent? Is she going to attack me, right? By the time she tries to get back into the car and he's now coming around the front of the car, that's when this other guy starts running up, yelling, get out of the car, get out of the fucking car, you know, all this stuff.
Reaching
and then
in,
she backs up.
The
Yeah, he tries to reach in, she backs up, and then she pulls forward. And between her backing up and pulling forward, like I said, that's a matter of like 2 seconds ish of action. Now, I'm not saying that he was right and he did everything perfectly. But
that's why
this is going to.
Dion, what are you saying?
Okay, what I'm saying is, like, so there are two different things going on here, and I want to make sure that people don't construe that me explaining one thing is my condonement of another thing, right?
Yes, so no, but I just want to know what you're clearly giving these facts to raise an issue or to like make a point, and I'm trying to get you there.
Okay,
I don't understand.
So my point is, whenever you are faced with a situation where there is a mismatch of force, whether that be you're engaged with law enforcement or the military or just some thug on the street, right? Like, you have to drop every idea in your head about how this situation should be, and you have to react to that situation as it is.
The heat of the moment, fog and friction.
Right.
And anything could happen. And I totally agree. I don't envy the situation that the guy was in to have to make these sorts of life and death decisions in a split second. I don't envy that.
Right. Now, he's the trained individual. He should have been trained to react better.
So this is where I'm trying to hear. Are you saying like, okay, and I'll agree with you to a certain extent if what you're trying to say is it's difficult when you're not in that position to know how hard and how fast these things happen, and that, you know, we can sit up here and nitpick everything that this agent did, but in the reality of it, it wasn't an easy scenario for him to be in. Is that the overall point that you're making here?
That's part of my point. And I'm also going to say, Thea, I think this is probably the point that I made on a social media post that you disagreed with. Renee Good did not act the way that she should have. I have family members who are law enforcement, and like and I've been through like concealed carry training courses and stuff. And basically what they say is the situation will never improve if you are combative and non-compliant with the law enforcement.
How
they have the gun,
they have like I'm not mad at you.
Here's,
Like, just not
here's the thing. This is so what I didn't agree with, and I didn't, as I normally will make a comment on social media and I won't like elaborate. And I knew we were going to have this discussion. The problem that I have, and as someone who herself, my personal experiences, I have experience over policing. I have experienced you're living your life and now you have an encounter with the police, and the shot, everything you said about that agent is 10 times more true for the public, because the agent is the trained individual, right? The agent should know how to deal with the public. And if the agent thinks that every time he deals with the public's going to be behaving well, and if the public isn't being compliant or they're being rude or they're calling him fat, and if that means that you can't handle that such that you don't shoot somebody in the face, you should not be in that role. Okay. But the point you're making is the public should be trained how to deal with ICE, is really what the arguments that I'm hearing, is that as a member of the public, if you're not polite and nice, that you should be willing, that there's a real possibility that you'll get shot in the face. And I think that's a choice that we're making as a society. If we're making the argument that the more you don't behave well, a consequence may be you getting shot in the face by the federal government of our country,
so
right? Like
I brought that to anybody who has a gun, right? It does not matter even if I'm armed, if I don't have my hand on my gun and that other guy does have his hand on his gun, I don't care who that guy is. I don't care if he works for the federal government or if he's a criminal, right? At this point in time, my job, like, I can either see that guy prosecuted, or I could die.
It can't be that you have to treat the police, the federal government, or whatever. You have to treat them with kid gloves because they have a gun, and if you activate them, they might shoot you. Because then you live to do that.
Because then you live to prosecute him. Right? You can't do anything about it if you're dead.
We have to hold law enforcement to a higher standard than what you're describing. We have to.
The Supreme Court has said that cops have to. The Supreme Court has said that cops have to accept the fact that people are going to be mean to them. They were going to call them fat.
Not everyone is going to act exactly like they're supposed to. What if it's someone with a mental health, having some type of mental health episode? What if it's a child that doesn't completely understand the situation? If we're saying that when law enforcement, because they're armed, we have to treat them at any given time like they might use that weapon. Your argument, I 100% agree to a civilian. If I'm walking up and a civilian is armed and I don't know this person, I don't know anything about them, and I don't know what their background is, I am not fucking with them because I don't know what this person is capable of. I hold law enforcement to a different standard. I hold ICE to a different standard because we are saying that they are agents of the government. And I think it's unacceptable to say that if you ruffle their feathers or you don't perfectly comply, that this is what could be, this is a possible outcome. To me, this should not be a possible outcome, right? It shouldn't be.
I think that my point is being somewhat lost, because my point is not that law enforcement and military should be able to get away with this type of behavior. My point is that they can better be prosecuted and held to account for their bad actions, which means that there's more likelihood of us getting bad actors out of those positions and reforming the training and everything if you live through the encounter to go prosecute them.
How has that worked out for every Black person who's been shot from sleeping in bed?
I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying you have 100% chance of surviving if you comply. I am saying your chances drastically decrease of surviving if you don't comply. That's all I'm saying.
But I think that's a bad point to make here. Okay, because
I just want people to live.
I'll just say that.
I'm trying to help people survive.
But I think it's focusing on the wrong thing, because to me that shouldn't be true, and the reason it's true is because you have a law enforcement agency running amok, acting like people like to use the Gestapo as an example, and to me, I get it. You're saying like, and I'll tell you what I tell my kids. Like, if you are in these situations, just do what they tell you. And I agree. So I'm not disagreeing in theory, like, yes. But in this situation, okay, she didn't comply perfectly. She didn't. And again, one of the things that bothers me when I do watch the tapes, and this is a legit training issue, and as somebody who, I don't know if you ever did when you guys were deploying, I'm assuming you did, when we did the fire team training, right? When you would be on a fire team and there's 4 or 5 of you, and they learn, you get trained of how do you clear a building as a team? Who's doing what? How do you, what's very clear when I see these ICE encounters, and I've seen several of these videos now, is that there's a lack of training with them because they don't seem to all know how to work as a team to de-escalate a situation, especially when you have one person say, get out the car, and one person saying, move your car, right? That tells me that they don't have standardized ways of saying, okay, if a car is in the middle of the road, this is how we address it. Person one is the person that's dealing with the driver. If there's anybody else, you're dealing with that. And we're going to work as a team to address this. It just looks like chaos. And
yes.
As someone in the military, I know we train for chaos. And if their training clearly is not such that they seem to know how to address these situations in the moment. And to me, that is reflective of poor training. The competing command is reflective of poor training on the part of them.
I totally agree with everything that you just said. I guess my point is, if any of us were in that situation, my advice would be survive the encounter so that we can fight it later. Because if you get shot in the head, it doesn't help, right? Unless you become a martyr.
And I'm going to say something that I don't know, it is what it is. I think because I'm Black, I'm much more likely to comply. Because I have grown up in a country watching videos of police shooting Black people for my entire life. All right. And, I'm old enough to remember Rodney King and that video going and all that. So I think that for me, my instinct is to comply and get out of the situation. I'm not an agitator. I'm allergic to capsaicin. So if I get pepper sprayed, that will kill me. So I'm not the person that would do that. And I understand that's why I'm not disagreeing with you, but I also feel like that the way that the system should work, that even the person who doesn't comply, even the person who's acting, being annoying, they're agitating, that the training of the law enforcement officials should be such that they can deal with that person without a life being lost. And
yes,
that
totally
is where
agree.
And the problem is that the training has been reduced because they're trying to flood the streets with ICE. The thresholds have been reduced so that they're accepting people who aren't physically fit enough, who haven't passed all the right tests. All of these things are being reduced to just flood the street with ICE agents that are underprepared for this. The administration and the leadership of ICE are telling the agents, you're all going to die. They're all coming after to kill you. Trump is
that part.
Trump's saying, I'm going to pardon you anyway. If you shoot him, who cares? I'm going to pardon you anyway.
But it's that part. That point you made, Will, was something the few notes I had written was this us versus them, where you have a law enforcement agency that views the public as their enemy. Right. And so if the public as a whole is your enemy, right, because it's not even that they are looking at the immigrants that they're trying to detain as the enemy. It's the public as a whole is your enemy. So now you're going into these situations as a hostile force, right, because you see them as your enemy. And I think that does a mind game on these ICE agents, right? And part of them being masked, I actually think that's part of the problem with them being masked, right? Because it creates this again, us versus them. I'm not going to trust when masked people just run up on me with like what Dion said. They look militarized. They look like something you would see in a third world country. It's amazing that these are the streets of the United States, and again, that so many people are willing to. There's a lack of empathy of what it's like to live under those conditions, right? From people who are living outside of Minneapolis. Even if you yourself are not, you're a citizen, you're not doing anything, to live under the constant fear of having to encounter what the ICE force is now, that puts stress on everybody. Or even like, let's say, I'll say for like a white person living in Minneapolis, it's not that, oh, well, I'm white and no one's going to stop me. Well, what if I'm driving and, these incidents are happening around me? They're talking about them setting off these chemical, the pepper spray and stuff near schools, having to close schools. Everybody's impacted by this. And the lack of empathy of people outside of these communities to say, who wants to live? Nobody wants to live like that, right? And so even if immigration is a problem that needs to be addressed, you're creating all these other problems in the act of addressing the problem. You know what I mean?
You're creating a counterinsurgency, if you will,
Yeah.
where for every immigrant that you try to go after, you're creating 10 more. And I get, okay, Black and brown people have perhaps more of an incentive to play nice and to just do what they're told, right? But as a white person, I fear being in that situation because I would relish the fact to be a pain in the fucking ass to an ICE agent.
I recommend against it.
I am the whitest white guy you can, and you're going to pull me over. I am going to be a pain in your ass. And
I recommend against
both of the individuals that were killed were white people.
I know, but this brings me to another point that I wanted to make. And I don't know if you guys saw the video where Renee Good's wife, like just after the shooting, she cries out, "Why do you have real bullets?" And when I saw that, I was like, I was kind of dumbfounded because I was like, what do you mean? Why do you have real, like, they're law enforcement. Of course they have real bullets. And what it made me think is that these two women did not truly understand what the consequences could be of their actions. And again, I am not at all saying that we as the American people should be afraid of our local, state, or federal government agencies. We absolutely should not. We, just as our founding fathers said, our government should fear us, right? I'm totally about 2A and all of that stuff. But at the same time, just because they should fear us doesn't mean they're not carrying real guns, and it doesn't mean that a situation can't flare up. So, like, my fear is that a lot of these people, especially white people, especially it seems like white women, feel impervious. They feel invulnerable because they are white women, that they can just go do whatever they want. And to a large extent, I think what most of them are doing is perfectly legal and permissible, but like, they're really like pushing the boundaries without understanding that it doesn't take much for that situation to escalate to gunshots.
The why do you have real bullets, though, I don't think is as bad of a question as you make it out to be, because it depends on, because when you do see police that are deployed to a lot of these protests and stuff, that's when they have the rubber bullets, because they're doing crowd control, and it's not the assumption that deadly force would not be needed, because there's no,
they don't leave their 9mm behind. They still have their sidearm when they're doing crowd control.
But the point, I'm saying the idea that their first instinct would be to use the lethal force. I don't think it's weird to be like, why? Because in the moment, I could see myself saying, why was that the thing you went for? Like, why are you sitting here shooting real bullets at somebody in this scenario? Yeah, there had to have been another level of force you could have started with in this scenario, right?
What
and
she was doing what she was doing was impeding. Got it. What they should have been doing is crowd control. Got it. So that's tasers and rubber bullets. Like, not, they were not attacking them with flagpole. They were not actively assaulting the ICE agent.
The other thing is, and this is where I think, again, the poor relationship between ICE and local law enforcement, because again, if this woman is creating a traffic infraction, there's a whole police force for that, right? But because ICE is operating in this bubble, you have a car blocking the road. So instead of being able to call the local police and say, "Hey, there's a car blocking this road. Can somebody come get these people?" ICE is taking it upon themselves to do crowd control and things that they're not trained for, nor is that their mission. And now we're seeing them do it poorly, and it's resulting in a loss of life.
So I think this brings up where our social media feeds are feeding us different things, because what I saw, and again, I have to say, I got to take everything these days with a grain of salt, because I can't believe
Mhm.
anything that's coming my way. But what I saw was ICE vehicles were trying to move through that neighborhood on their way to do whatever detainment, immigration enforcement that they were doing, and then she blocked their truck from proceeding.
Mhm.
So
But
it
then
wasn't like, it
wave
wasn't a
them
traffic stop, it wasn't
by.
traffic control, it was
But that, no, but
they
I'm
were
saying
trying to
her
go.
blocking. But my point is, okay, I'm sure they're not like, I'm sure she's not some military person where they're completely blocked in and they can't get to where they're going. But my whole point is, again, you still have a vehicle impeding traffic, essentially, is what you're talking about. You're still describing the same thing. My point is, if there's a whole local police force, that's part of what they do, right? When you have cars doing all sorts of foolishness, you call the cops and say, hey, there's a car blocking the road. Can somebody come, tell this car to move and get rid of them? But because there's this disconnect in the relationship there, that's not happening. So now you have ICE folks trying to deal with this woman moving this and to move this car in a way that they don't appear to be trained to do it, in a way that is not, where a life is not lost. And I will acknowledge, I know one of the things that I think it was JD Vance mentioned was this agent had been run down by a vehicle,
two
previously.
years ago. 2 years
2
ago.
years. But to me, that point did not help. If anything, if your past experience means that you're now more likely to use deadly force because you're traumatized by what happened to you in the past, that is an indication that perhaps you should not be out in the field, right?
100%.
Because again, I don't want to have no sympathy for this agent, because perhaps he should not have been put in that situation where he would have a trauma response to this, to the Renee Good's vehicle, and not knowing what she's going to do with it. And so I think the larger issue, though, beyond just this one shooting, is the idea of having this militarized police force on the streets of our cities, and the fact that there seems to be no acknowledgement that by our federal government that this is a problem, right? That
Yeah.
this is not how you treat Americans.
We should talk about the second shooting too. Like,
Yeah, we
we're
haven't even
45
gotten.
minutes in, and we haven't even talked about the
Yeah,
fact that there was another shooting
yeah.
yesterday, right? And
Yeah.
I think this one was even worse. Like, I cannot find anybody who thinks, well, I shouldn't say that, but the number of people who think that this shooting was at all justified is extremely low. And you look at the video evidence, and some people say
And
they think that he was reaching for a firearm, and I've watched the videos and I'm like, no, he wasn't reaching for anything. In fact, the agent took his firearm away from him, and then they shot him.
so, and my crux of this one is that because of the response to the first shooting, where there was no accountability, where everyone like seemed to move on like this was fine, is what led to this one, where like, oh, this is something we could, like, if we feel any kind of danger, we're just going to start shooting and
Well,
ask questions
let,
later.
Yeah.
in acknowledging both shootings, I wanted one point I wanted to raise, that's we're kind of skirting around right now, is the idea that the administration's immediate response within minutes of all of this hitting the news for the first shooting was to label the victim or the person who was killed as a terrorist. Like, now everybody's a terrorist, I guess. Everybody's a terrorist. And then
Because that gives
to
them
just
the most
completely not
leeway
even
to do whatever
allow
they
time
want.
for an
Right. They can
investigation before.
unalive you if you're a terrorist.
You were frozen, Thea.
Yes.
That's why we started talking over you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It was the labeling, the use of the word terrorist. Now everybody's a terrorist. And then to then draw a conclusion before any type of investigation could have even happened, right? So we're not even going to say, well, let's have an investigation. Let's look at all the information before we draw a conclusion. You have you have the head of Homeland Security, the president of the United States, the vice president of the United States out here saying, oh, well, they were a terrorist. Like, this was the Boston Marathon bombing or something like that. Like, that pisses me off, because terrorists have done horrible things in this country, right? Like we have lived through, again, 9/11, Oklahoma City, Boston. Like there are real acts of terrorism that have happened in the United States and people have lost their lives. Blocking your car and calling somebody fat, saying, I'm not mad at you, that is not terrorism. And let's stop using that word for everything. You know what I mean? Like, I think we'll do another episode, I'm sure, where we talk about Venezuela and all of the Maduro of it all.
Those are
But like, let's
terrorists
stop.
too.
That's what I'm saying. Narco terrorists. That's not a thing. Like, we need to just stop making up words. Like, I know all words are made up, but come on. Like,
Thea,
these words have to mean something.
before you joined us, before we started recording, Will and I were talking about sort of how the Republicans are now starting to use some of the same arguments and phrases in defense of themselves that they used against Democrats, 5 years ago. And this is another example, right, where they're calling everybody a terrorist. Well, 5 years ago they were saying, oh, you keep calling everybody a racist and it just loses all meaning, and everybody's a racist now and nobody cares, right? Well, same thing, except
Yes.
that when the US government calls you a terrorist, they have carte blanche to unalive you. So it's a little bit
It's
worse.
that part. And that's why they're doing it. I mean, that's why they're using that language, because especially to the passive person, right, who's not necessarily plugged into all these stories, not watching all the videos, and that still have a level of trust in the government, then they hear the vice president say, well, the person was a terrorist. They go, oh, well, that's why they shouldn't, if they were terrorists, they probably deserved to be killed, because look at because we associate terrorism with danger and being a threat to the public, right? And here that's not, it just doesn't apply. But I agree, that's a very good point, Dion, that at some point the word loses its meaning. And I always said the same thing with the racism part, right? I agreed with that, is that if you start using words inaccurately, they lose their meaning. And then when it does apply, then people don't really take it as seriously as they should. But coming back to the second shooting, I think you're right. The reason that we're seeing this happen, and now I think, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see this happen, is because, I think, again, there's this us versus them with ICE versus the public, and then you have leadership condoning it, and every time they're not even willing to say, well, let me look into whether this agent acted poorly or outside of their training, or they violated guidelines. It's like, no, she was a terrorist, he was a terrorist, they were under, and conclusions are drawn. And I think one of you guys said, if I were an ICE agent, I would be expecting my pardons coming down, when this, at some point when this administration leaves.
And the part, like, being a pain in the ass should not be a murder sentence. And were some of these people being a pain in the ass? Probably. Was she blocking traffic? To some extent, but she was also waving cars in front of her. It's not like no one could get by. She was waving them in front and people were going in front of her. And it's just like, we have a right to assemble peacefully. We have a right to be a pain in the ass in those ways. It's kind of like, it reminds me, what was the protest where people were linking hands and going across highways and blocking traffic, especially in California, I think, right? Huge pain in the ass, right? But for anyone to drive through those protesters, like, you can't do that.
It's not. And the other thing is, I think it's important to point out that deadly force should not be used because, like, any argument that I've heard on the right about, well, what do you expect the agent to do? Look at what she was saying. Look at how she was acting. Right. Of course he would be upset, or of course that would trigger anyone. I'm like, but that's not what deadly force is supposed to be used for, right? That's not why our cops carry guns. They don't. The idea is, law enforcement is not supposed to carry a weapon to instill fear in the public. It's supposed to be to protect themselves, right? But it's not supposed to instill fear in people. And I feel like that's what we are seeing, is like a fear campaign. Like, you don't like it, you should then go, because like what happened, the one video where the ICE agent was, subsequent to the first shooting, said to this guy, didn't you see what happened? Didn't you learn your lesson? And it's like, well, what lesson was I supposed to learn?
You learn your lesson. Yeah.
Didn't you learn your lesson? Well, what lesson was I supposed to learn from that incident? Explain to me. So I can't use free speech. I can't speak. I can't, because a lot of this is speech written. Like, this is, the ICE agents are listening to people blow whistles. They're on the street
Video
while
recording.
they're video recording. They're yelling things that the ICE agents don't like. You have a right to do that, you know?
And that's the thing that I brought up with, like, the Supreme Court has ruled that, like,
Yeah.
people don't have to be nice to cops. Like, they can call
No.
them pigs. They can call them
And
names and tell them to fuck off and all these things. Like, cops essentially have to take it because they're the
yes.
trained
Well,
professional when
and
dealing
Well,
with
it's protected speech.
yes. And let's also I'll take my lawyer hat on for a second. JD Vance made the he said that, oh, they have absolute immunity. Federal agents enforcing immigration law have absolute immunity. And so for the public, for our listening audience, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. No court has said that. No law. There's nothing on the books that says that federal aid. And think about it logically. Again, that cannot be right.
but what they do have is pardons coming from Trump, which essentially equates to
federal.
For federal,
for federal prosecution, not for state prosecution.
Yeah. So the state of Minnesota can prosecute them, and Trump could pardon them all he wants, and it does nothing to pardon them from
the other legal. The other legal thing I've heard float around, people talk about qualified immunity. Qualified immunity does not make it normally applies to civil, the ability to sue a law enforcement person from, for damages, money damages based on their conduct. And that has never been a barrier to criminal charges, right? So notice, like in the George Floyd incident, once that cop was acting like, he was charged with murder. Like, you don't get qualified immunity, in a murder or homicide scenario here. Like, those are two separate things. So here, again, if an investigation, if Minnesota State or, Minneapolis or whoever were to investigate and decide to bring homicide charges, there wouldn't be any qualified immunity based on the fact that this was a federal agent. You know what I mean?
I do think that we have a history in this country of giving deference to law enforcement. We just see where, and again, like, I have family members who are law enforcement and heard some of the stories that they've had to deal with, seen some videos and stuff. And it is a tough job, and I could see why. I don't know that any of these agents are going to get a truly fair trial, just because of who in the state of Minnesota has not seen, like, tons of videos.
That's the problem here, is like, but it is what it is, right? Like, every, I remember, for people who don't realize, like, Timothy McVeigh was tried in Colorado, because, now granted, these were federal charges, but he was tried in Colorado because they knew they couldn't get an impartial jury in Oklahoma after what he did. So that is going to be a challenge here. If any charges are ever brought by the state, I think realistically they would probably move it outside of that county and probably go somewhere else in Minnesota. But I that's what I would probably look to do, somewhere else within the state. But the reality is, like, we don't know how this story ends. We don't know what's going to happen. And as these shootings continue, this violence continues, what I fear is that I don't want to say innocent person, because I think it's not my place to say whether Renee Good was innocent or, but, like, I think that, like, a true bystander, like a child or someone, is going to get killed if this type of behavior continues. And that's the part that, the story about the family that there was, I think, 4 or 5 children in the vehicle, and I think it was either tear gas was used in the vehicle. The child had to be rushed to, hospital. They weren't breathing. Why? Like, why are we doing, like, why is that okay? you know.
Well, one of the
Um,
social media posts that I recently put up was, we as Americans have to ask ourselves, what is the cost? And I don't just mean in dollars. I mean in like in
yes,
bloodshed and order and trust. What is the cost that we're willing to bear for the enforcement of laws? And not just that the laws are enforced, but the methods that are chosen to enforce them,
yes,
right? We have had some form of immigration enforcement for over 100 years, right? ICE is, I think a lot of people don't remember this or realize this. ICE is a fairly recent construct coming from
yes,
9/11, right? Like immigration enforcement used to largely just be an administrative enforcement, not a criminal enforcement. And as you've said, Theo, we've militarized this branch of law enforcement. And as a libertarian, I already distrust government, but when you start cosplaying law enforcement as military, that brings my trust even further down, right? And that's not the kind of society that I think that any of us wants to live in. We don't want America to look like some third world, banana republic where we've got uniformed troops, keeping the peace everywhere. That's bullshit.
I
And
and I
that's
think
what
And I think this is where Trump knows what he's doing, in that he's not subjecting, quote unquote, his voters to this type of treatment. This is why we don't see ICE in Texas engaging in this type of tactics, because the people who vote for Trump would not want to live under these conditions. And because we've created an us versus them, blue versus red kind of dichotomy here, I think that's where I say there's a lack of empathy on the part of the people who are not being subjected to this and don't believe that they would be, right? Because then you're like, well, that's not my problem. That's them over there. They don't believe in immigration, and they want open borders, and I don't want that. So it's okay for them to live in a police state, because that's what this is. It's a police state, and it reminds me of when I've been deployed, right? Like seeing this footage, I remember being in Kabul and seeing like how we used to have to transport ourselves across the city when I was going from one location to the other. I'd be going from like Phoenix to NKC. And I remember like the way we treated, if anybody was in blocking us, or the way we would address those crowds. That's what this looks like. And in that instance, we were an occupying force at
because you
war.
were at war.
And yeah, and this looks very similar to me when I'm
Right.
seeing. The only thing is, like, I think we're trained better. At least we were much more organized in how we knew how to deal with these types of things when they would happen. And it's just mind blowing that that's in Minneapolis of all places. Like that's what's happening. Like ICE is rolling
And,
through there like they're in Afghanistan.
and that's the argument that I hear from Republicans. And I, Dion, I'll try to help you, present their point that we say, well, why aren't they doing this in Texas? And there is a significant number of ICE agents in Texas. Now, 13% or whatever it is in Minneapolis is overkill, but there is still a significant number in California, Texas, and Florida. And some of the arguments from the right is that, like, well, you don't see this happening in Texas because the people of Texas actually support ICE, they support their mission, and that's why no one's getting killed in Texas. Whereas I argue, no, the way that ICE is conducting themselves in Texas
It's
is
different.
completely different than
Yes.
how they're conducting themselves in Minneapolis. Texas is treating ICE as ICE is treating Texans not like they're the enemy. They're on the same side. So
Yes.
they're be much more humane and judicial in how they perform their duties. But ICE views Minneapolis and Minnesotans as the enemy, so they're just going to run roughshod over them. And
And I'll speak to even for like LA, like where I lived in LA, I never saw ICE. I have yet to see ICE anywhere near where I live, right? But I live in a predominantly white area, an affluent area, part of LA. ICE is not in my area, and and so it's easy to like not realize what it's like when you are disconnected from it, right? So even because I guarantee you, if ICE came up in Redondo Beach or Manhattan Beach, it would be a very different vibe. You know what I mean? It just would be than it is when they're in East LA or when they're in South Central, and that's the problem, right? Like if you're enforcing the laws, you're enforcing the laws. You shouldn't treat people differently just because of where you're enforcing those laws. And I do think we see that, and maybe that's part of American history. We've seen that for decades when it comes to race and policing, and so we're seeing it here. I do find I want to bring up one point because I know we're about to run out of time, though, that it is interesting that now you're seeing race. You have to be the right kind of white here, in order for you to get sympathy. And now, so it's like it's not just that you're white, so you were treated differently. It's like you got to be the right kind of white. You got to be a red.
You have blue hair. You can't look like a lesbian.
You can't be, you can't have any other, you can't be you can't be progressive. You can't.
No nose rings.
You have to be, like a certain type of white person now in order to garner sympathy. Because that was one thing that was interesting, how quickly they dissected, oh, well, she has pronouns in her email. Oh, she has a wife.
Pronouns are now a death sentence.
Yeah. So
okay. What takeaways do we have from this for our audience? I don't want to speak for Brett, but I kind of feel like if Brett was here, he would say, we need to enforce laws that are on the books, but these guys went too far.
I think that's probably fair.
Yeah. And I think we all, to varying degrees, kind of agree. Like, I don't think any of us are saying we just shouldn't enforce the immigration laws that are on the books. Although I will say that our immigration laws are just a spaghetti mess of cobbled together gunk that needs to be fixed. That's a separate topic, but they were all duly.
I would agree with that. Brett would say that these agents went too far. I would not agree that most Republicans would agree with that statement. I think most Republicans, certainly many, if not most, would say essentially fuck around and find out. If law enforcement tells you to do something, I don't care what your reasoning is, you should do it. And if you die in the process, then that's your own fault.
Well, in my challenge,
problem.
My challenge to our viewers who might hold that view of fuck around and find out, to some extent, I would say yes. And that was my point about, like, try to survive the encounter, right? Don't fuck around. Once you realize that this is escalating, don't fuck around and then find out. But at the same time, ask yourself, do we want to live in a society where the slightest mistake on your part or misstep or whatever, misreaction to something on your part is a death sentence? And I think most people would say we all make mistakes. We all react poorly sometimes. It should not be an automatic death sentence if that happens.
I think that is the takeaway, is that it's a choice. It's a choice that we make as a society to say that that if you fuck around, you might find out at the hands of our government, right? Because again, the don't tread on me, folks. Remember, this is the whole reason I've spent my life listening to people say I should be able to own a gun, because if the government oversteps, I should be able to defend myself. If you truly believe that, then it can't be that if someone speaks to law enforcement ICE agent wrong, they're fucking around and they about to find out with a bullet to the face. Like the two are incompatible. So it's like,
absolutely.
I guess my argument to the audience is, what do these things actually mean to you right now? Because we're now seeing it being tested. Do we want, or how comfortable are you with the government behaving in this way, even if you don't believe it's towards you, towards anybody, because it could be you, right? And it's that quote, first they came for, and then they came for, and when they came for me, there was no one to stand up, kind of, right? At some point, it's going to be you, because I can tell you, as someone who has had these kind of encounters with law enforcement, it always, like I'll give a quick story because it's relevant. I was like 23. I was home on leave. At the time, my parents lived in Greenville, South Carolina. I went to a bar with friends and somebody was trying to call me. So I stepped outside the bar and I went into I was on the street, right? And it's downtown Greenville. There were two white girls drunk. One of them was throwing up in the bushes. They were a mess. And then I was sitting there trying to fiddle with my phone. All of a sudden cops come out of nowhere and they're asking me, there was a curfew in place for in Greenville. If you were under 18, you couldn't be out in public. So the cops come up to me, they're yelling at me. I remember being disoriented because I thought at first they were talking to the drunk girls, but I didn't even realize they were talking to me because I was looking down. And I think the fact that I didn't look up right away aggravated the police officer. And he starts screaming at me. He's yelling something. And I don't even realize that he's telling me I'm out past curfew. And I said, oh, and the problem is when I came outside, I left my purse in the bar and my keys, everything is inside. And I'm trying to say, well, I just came out of this bar, which if I've just came out of this bar, I'm over 21, right? And he's not listening. And I remember I went to I looked like I was going to walk. I turned to be I'm trying to show him that I was going where I came from, but it looked like I was, I guess, going to move or run or something. And they took me to the ground. And I was just and I just remember I started crying. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand why. And meanwhile, I kid you not, as I'm on the ground, Becky over there is oh my God, just acting the fool. And I was why am I on the ground while drunk Becky's over here? And I remember it was such a disarming moment. And what ends up, luckily, by the grace of God, one of my friends came looking for me and was he was a guy and he came out and he was looking, he's what's going on? And he's is she with you? And he's yeah, we were here, she's home visiting. He must have said something about me being on leave. And then so he let my friend go get my purse so I could show my ID, and my military ID was on the top. So the first thing I pulled out was my military ID, and then everything just de-escalated because I was military. But that moment never left me because we talk about complying. There's confusion. There is you don't understand what's happening sometimes. You don't understand why they're being so aggressive. And if we're living in a society where if your inability to react correctly in those moments means that your life is on the line, I promise you that's not the world we want to live in, yeah. And eventually it won't just be me, the Black girl that knows that. It's going to be all of us. And I think that's the danger
as we saw these past couple of weeks, right? So Renee Good, white woman, and Alex Pretti, a white man, were shot by ICE agents, right? So yeah, it is, for any of our viewers or listeners who think that this doesn't apply to them because they're white, heterosexual, male, Christian, whatever, nah, it could be any of us.
ICE doesn't know you're a Republican. ICE isn't going to know you're a Republican. If you have an off encounter, they're not going to know, and if you're there and you see something happening, you're in the wrong place in the wrong time, they're not going to be oh, that one, he's Republican. I'm not going to, I'm not going to do.
I guess if you're wearing a MAGA hat, right? Maybe everybody should just have an emergency MAGA hat to put on just in case.
Yep.
So before we close, because you're talking about where do we go from here, Dion? And the only maybe just quick hit this: abolish ICE, reform ICE, what? Because that's where we're at this point. Is we're kind of back to where we were several years ago. A bunch of people are abolish ICE. It's too far gone. It can't be reformed. Other people are politically, that's going to be rough to be saying that. So let's just say reform ICE. Some people are saying defund ICE. What do we do?
So the Libertarian Party official stance is abolish ICE, along with many other three-letter agencies of the government. Yeah, so I'll go with that.
Yeah, I think my gut says reform ICE, but I think clarify ICE's mission and utilize them as in a way that is not, fugitive slave catchers, which is how they are operating, right? And that. A lot of people say, "Oh, Gestapo." No, it's not the Gestapo that they're modeling their behavior after. It's the slave catchers of the 1800s. That's who they're behaving like. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't know. And it's rare that I don't have I don't know. I don't like what they are. I don't like how they're being used. I think before we even get to abolish them, I say unmask them. Because I actually think if they were unmasked, we would see very different conduct from them. Very different conduct. Because when you hide behind a mask, it allows you to be your worst version of yourself because you know that you're never going to be held accountable personally for your actions. So I think unmask them before we even talk about abolishing them and see then how these agents behave when the world has to see who they are.
And that's a chicken or egg thing because the counter argument is the only reason that they mask is because they're getting doxxed for acting like assholes. So
thank you. Then don't act like stop acting like an asshole, right? If you're not on camera, if you're not on camera shoving your gun in someone's face, maybe you don't. There's not a reason to dox you, right? And I know Border Patrol. Like I have friends, family friends that are Border Patrol and ICE agents. I know who they are. I never had a problem with their existence, and you know what I mean. And so like it's funny because I know who they are, and the idea that they could be one of the mass people is weird to me. You know what I mean? But the fact is, like a lot of us know ICE people that it shouldn't be secret. You're not CIA. You're not spies. That your identity needs to be concealed for the purpose of you executing the mission. So unmask them. And then don't act like it's cool. Police don't. Why their logic should apply to police then? If when police enforce the laws, they're not masked. So why does ICE have to be masked? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So for me, I find abolish ICE to be politically an issue, but it needs to be a whole lot closer to abolishing than simply reforming. I think defunding is the first step. These what is it, $35,000, $40,000 bonuses for every single member of ICE. Like that's more money than a teacher makes. Like how we spend our money is a completely different issue, but I think we significantly defund them, which helps to strip them down kind of more towards the studs. But there's something to be said for, when an organization achieves a reputation for XYZ or being corrupt to the bone, that you just start over. You're like, look, we need an organization to do what ICE does. Call it something else. Start from scratch.
I mean, like I said, we did deportations and immigration enforcement before there was an ICE. We did it administratively in a different manner.
I actually argue. I guess my answer to the question is not only defund. I would take it beyond. I would say demilitarize ICE, demilitarize them.
Because you defund them, you would, yeah.
But I demilitarize them. Take the masks off. Get rid of. They don't have them out here looking like running around in NRAPs looking like a military force, right? Like demilitarize ICE, and I think that's what I would want to see, because I think if you demilitarize them, it refocuses how they would execute their mission. And
they should have to use a trained law enforcement branch that does that. So like if you're deporting whomever who just overstayed a visa, right? That is a purely administrative deportation. Like hey, you're not allowed to be here anymore. Let's get you on a plane. And there's no reason for force there. If it's, MS-13 or Tren de Agua or whoever, right? Like you actually know this violent criminal who also happens to be an illegal immigrant is holed up in this place, then go use the proper law enforcement techniques that you would use on any criminal. And it just so happens that person's an illegal immigrant.
Here's the thing: the dangerous, the MS-13. I promise you, they have a warrant. Those people, they already have warrants for actual criminal infraction.
Yeah,
right. So then send in the FBI. Send in the FBI because guess what? You have warrants that will warrant that use of force that you don't even need ICE to execute to capture those people. If they're so dangerous and you have reason to believe they're dangerous, you can probably go after them through the criminal law enforcement. So that's why I don't buy
the ICE memo. We didn't even talk about the warrantless entry to houses. Like we could go another hour on this stuff, but Yeah, we
That's
do
what I'm
have to
saying.
wrap
Like,
up.
yeah. So more, I think next week we'll probably, this will be
Well, we're going to
continued.
keep doing that.
Yeah, but I do think, like I said, the foreign policy of it all is the next topic that's happened in the last 6 months since we had an episode. But yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. That
Okay.
demilitarize ICE, demilitarize them.
Do you want
So
to start us off on what's been making you happy this week? It's been kind of a week, huh?
I know. I will. So I'm in Vegas right now. I came with one of my friends for her daughter's cheerleading competition. And it made me happy to see these little kids. I mean, it's a world. Anyone out there, a listener who has been involved with children's cheerleading, it's a different world. This trip is making me happy. I actually got to see a academy friend that I hadn't seen in 20 years. He came by. He lives here in Vegas, and it's always good to. One thing I like about being a veteran is that everywhere I go, there's probably someone I know, and then you get to see them and go, "Oh my God, remember? I haven't seen you since when?" And so I would say seeing him made me happy. Being out here this weekend, getting away, even with all of the things going on, that life still goes on, and you still get to make these memories and have these good times. So that's what's making me happy.
Will?
For me, so I've got issues going on at home, but so it's a little tough to find some happiness. But what I will say, and I've said it again, that these podcasts, I think partially because I've got some shit going on at home, I have taken great joy in trolling some Facebook friends. All three of us are military. We have many Republican, MAGA, conservative friends, and I have been perhaps purposely poking the bear on my Facebook page. And so the fact that we can get together and have these kind of conversations is helpful, is cathartic, it gives me a little bit of hope in humanity. It's been a while, it's been a couple of months since we've done this, and it seems like so much has happened during that time. And when we started the episode today, we didn't kind of do our normal, at least I don't remember, do it like leadership podcast. And that we purposely come together to bring people from across the spectrum to have civil conversations, and it's just such a break from what I'm seeing, certainly on my Facebook page, that that's been kind of the bright spot for me, and the fact that while we're still looking for a Republican, that the three of us are going to keep on doing this, keep on trying to make an effort to, bring some kind of sensibility back to the world.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, we just got back a few days ago from our trip to Texas to visit Melissa's family. And it's always fun. I mean, lovely family members down there. And every time we're down there, they use it as an opportunity to have a big old party and invite all their friends and extended family and stuff. So we got to see all kinds of great people, eat some good barbecue and Mexican food, and just spend time. It was a delayed Christmas, so we saved exchanging gifts with that side of the family until we got down there. My son got to go to like a Harry Potter experience thing that they had down there, which was a lot of fun. He and I went to this indoor playground thing that had like rock climbing and bumper cars and bouncy castles and soft play, huge structures for us to run around it. So anyways, it was a lot of fun. It was great to take a break from everything and just spend time with lovely family. So
that's awesome.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our very long episode today. We still have a lot to talk about on all these topics, and we really want to get back into this and make this more routine again. So if you haven't already, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Where we'll talk about Venezuela.
Even Maduro.
That's my pick. my
probably.
pitch for this episode. It's Venezuela.
I think so.